Dragons. Those mythical reptilian creatures whose legend spans numerous cultures. When I say dragon, what do you imagine? A winged fire-breathing lizard destroying the village? Or a floating snake-like figure? That interpretation would have differed widely depending on where you lived millennia ago. Whether European or East Asian, the legends of dragons have had a significant impact on the culture of the people. At the time, if you were a European, you would imagine dragons as fearsome, unholy monsters, while to the Chinese, a dragon was a powerful and graceful being, the highest symbol among the animals. Even when dragons were myths, they were impactful on society on a scale rarely seen with a fictional beast. So that makes me think, what would the consequences be on human society if dragons were not just simply legends? What if in an alternate timeline, as this is Alternate History Hub, those mythical dragons actually existed? What if dragons were just as flesh and bone as any normal animal, like an elephant or an emu? Less dangerous than an emu, of course. How would this have affected human civilization? Dragons being real and flying and burning the village. Here is one scenario. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, if dragons were real, which type of dragons would be real? As you know, there are multiple types. Yes, thank you, Francis. I almost forgot. No, I didn't. As the dragon myth has transcended across regions and centuries, there have been countless interpretations, so you're going to have different ideas of what a dragon is. So for this video, I will focus on European dragons instead of the Chinese. This isn't because I like one over the other, it's because the contrast between these two is like the difference between a yappy chihuahua and an aircraft carrier. A scenario involving a real Chinese dragon is basically just the ancient legends from which the dragons came. To vastly oversimplify for the sake of time, Chinese dragons are practically godlike. The dragons can control the weather, the seasons, and involve a deep amount of the understanding of the religion from where they originated from. While European dragons are monstrous and animal-like, Chinese dragons have a vast source of knowledge, and in some cases can even speak. So placing them in an alternate scenario basically is just recreating the Chinese legends, because they are that powerful. I think it's best to avoid that. How would any of those European or Asian dragons even exist? It's scientifically impossible, you say again. Stop, Francis, stop. We're just placing dragons into this alternate world, the equivalent of letting your animals out of the cage in Zoo Tycoon. I want to analyze the cultural and human impact, not the scientific. So, what if dragons were real? In our timeline, the depiction of European dragons has always been a generally negative one. The Celts are one exception, as the dragon was a noble symbol of power and wisdom to them. But to the Greeks, Vikings, and Germans, dragons were fearsome monsters fighting the hero. When the continent eventually unified religiously under Christianity, the negative depiction was brought up to 11. Dragons were seen as demonic, the representation of evil itself, the worst of human qualities, practically just the devil on Earth. They even began breathing fire in representation of hell literally shooting at its victims. They were seen as greedy and vicious, guarded treasure even though there was nothing to spend it on. Maybe they bought dragon hats, I don't know. Their depiction has been varied between sentient and clever to just animalistic rage. The legend of Saint George and the Dragon tells the tale of a Christian saint who slayed the dragon in order to save the princess. Saints were often depicted slaying dragons. Today we see dragons as nothing more than fiction, but there was a time in medieval Europe where they weren't just simply brushed off. To the population, dragons were real. They were never seen, but they were perceived as a true threat to Christianity and the populace. Now, since this is dragons we're talking about, there is no 100% way to know how human society would specifically change if dragons were real. This scenario entirely depends on what type of dragons would exist. Would they be that clever, greedy, human-like creature, or would they just be flying dinosaurs? Each dragon personality spawns its own change to this alternate timeline, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to have these European dragons be animalistic. They aren't deities, they aren't the devil on Earth, they are simply an animal, as mystical as a lion or tiger is. There can even be different types of species of dragon. Scandinavia depicted the creatures as serpent-like, called the lindworm. The Slavs imagined gigantic three-headed dragons who were almost like gods, protecting crops or destroying them. If dragons were animals, they would be hated by humans. Not just Europeans, but every civilization on Earth. They would simply be too dangerous to be left alive. Even the Chinese, who held the dragon as a mystical being, would despise these flying lizards that might potentially attack villages and livestock. They would be significant threats to society, more than an animal attack, and more on the scale of a natural disaster. In most Western tales, they have been rogue but powerful beings. So say you're just in your village, tending your crops, and then suddenly it's entirely up in flames. Now this doesn't mean dragons are evil. Animals are animals. They don't have a moral compass and simply want to eat and reproduce. But even with that, I predict that humans and dragons would always have violent interactions. If dragons ate meat as they often were depicted in legend, then they easily could feed off the livestock of humans, swooping in and devouring sheep. This isn't because they're evil, it's because they're hungry. Empires and kingdoms would react to dragon raids violently, hunting parties or entire armies to hunt down the beasts. As mankind modernized, dragon population would dwindle across the world, just as it has with any incompatible species to human society. If Christianity still swept Europe, imagine crusades against dragons, salvation for anyone who slays a big lizard. To medieval Europeans, these creatures would be embodiments of Satan on Earth. In this alternate timeline, culture as a whole around the world has at least some reference to dragons. Slaying a great beast is a universal concept, and killing a dragon certainly could play a part in societies across the globe. In Eurasia, the dragon population becomes extremely low. An already generally small population wiped out. Dragons did live in Central Africa or the Americas, then those populations would remain relatively healthy. Less civilization means less attacks with dragons. Perhaps when explorers discover the Americans, they see dragons never seen before. As people modernize, the decline of dragons is inevitable. The best comparison is with the Eurasian wolf. Wolves were entirely wiped out from Western Europe. They were seen as a nuisance. They hunted livestock. Kingdoms paid to kill them off, and modernization did all the rest. Dragons could face the same fate. This is simply one scenario, and it's mostly just for fun. We'll never truly know how something would be in an alternate timeline, especially one with dragons. What do you think would have happened? Say in the comments. This is Alternate History Hub.